At exactly 11:47 p.m. on a cold February night, every single light in the royal palace went out, not just the chandeliers or the main power grid, but every electronic device, every backup generator, every emergency system that had never failed in over 2 centuries of royal history. In those first few seconds of absolute darkness, Palace Guard Marcus Chen heard something that would change everything he thought he knew about his job, his country, and the family he had sworn to protect with his life. What he witnessed in those critical moments would trigger the most classified emergency protocol in the nation's history. Mobilize secret forces that most government officials didn't even know existed, and uncover a truth that had been buried for decades. But Marcus didn't know any of that yet. All he knew was that in the suffocating blackness that had swallowed the palace whole, someone was moving through the corridors with the confident footsteps of a person who could see perfectly in the dark. This is the true story of that night, told through the eyes of the people who lived it, survived it, and were forever changed by what they discovered when the lights finally came back on. Marcus Chen had been walking the same patrol route for 3 years, and he knew every creak of the palace floors, every shadow cast by the ornate furniture, every sound that belonged and every sound that didn't. Tonight felt different from the moment he started his shift at 10 p.m. The air seemed thicker somehow, charged with an electricity that made the hair on his arm stand up despite the perfectly controlled temperature of the palace corridors. The royal family was in residence, which always meant heightened security. But tonight, there were additional protocols in place that Marcus hadn't seen before. Extra guards had been posted at entrances he didn't even know were considered entrances. Communication checks were happening every 15 minutes instead of the usual 30. Most unusual of all, 3 men in dark suits had arrived just after dinner and disappeared into the restricted wing of the palace with the head of security, Director Sarah Walsh. Marcus had asked his supervisor, Lieutenant Rodriguez, about the unusual activity, but had been told simply to focus on his own duties and report anything out of the ordinary. The problem was, everything felt out of the ordinary tonight. But Marcus couldn't put his finger on exactly what was wrong. He was approaching the intersection of the East Wing corridor when it happened. The lights didn't flicker or dim gradually like they might during a power outage. They simply vanished as if someone had thrown a switch that controlled not just the palace, but reality itself. The silence that followed was even more unsettling than the darkness. The constant hum of air conditioning, the barely audible buzz of security cameras, the distant sound of the kitchen staff finishing their late shift cleanup, all of it stopped at once. Marcus reached for his radio immediately, muscle memory taking over in the disorienting blackness. Security control, this is Guard Chen, reporting total power failure in East Wing. Over. Static. He tried again. Security control, do you copy? Nothing but dead air. His radio, which had never failed in 3 years of service, was completely silent. That's when he heard the footsteps. They were coming from the direction of the restricted wing, measured and confident, not the hurried pace of someone trying to navigate in the dark, but the steady rhythm of someone who knew exactly where they were going. Marcus fumbled for his flashlight, but when he pressed the button, nothing happened. He tried his backup light, his phone's flashlight, even the small LED on his keychain. Everything electronic was dead. The footsteps were getting closer, and Marcus could tell there were at least 2 people, possibly 3. He pressed himself against the wall, trying to stay calm and remember his training. In a situation like this, he was supposed to secure his position and wait for backup. But how could he call for backup when his radio was dead? How could he secure anything when he couldn't see his own hands in front of his face? The footsteps paused about 20 feet away from Marcus's position. In the absolute silence, he could hear whispered conversation, but the words were too quiet to make out. What he could tell was that one voice was definitely female, and there was something familiar about it that made his skin crawl. He had heard that voice before, but he couldn't place where or when. Then the voices stopped, and Marcus heard something that made his blood run cold. A series of electronic beeps, like someone entering a code on a keypad. But how could there be electronic beeps when everything electrical in the palace was dead? The beeping continued for about 10 seconds, followed by a soft mechanical whir that Marcus recognized as the sound of a heavy security door opening. The footsteps resumed, moving away from Marcus now, but he could tell they were heading toward the royal family's private quarters. Every instinct screamed at him to follow, but his training held him in place. Without communication or backup, pursuing unknown intruders in total darkness would be suicide. But letting them reach the royal family's wing might be worse. Marcus made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Instead of following the intruders, he began moving carefully toward the main security office, feeling his way along the wall and trying to find help. Each step was agony, his mind racing with possibilities of what might be happening to the people he was sworn to protect. The palace was enormous, and navigating it in complete darkness was like trying to solve a maze blindfolded. Marcus had to stop every few steps to reorient himself, running his hands along the walls to identify landmarks. The ornate molding near the state dining room, the slight depression in the floor where generations of footsteps had worn down the marble near the grand staircase, the distinctive smell of lemon oil that the housekeeping staff used in the library wing. It took him nearly 20 minutes to reach the main security office, a journey that usually took 5 minutes. When he finally found the door, his heart sank. It was locked, and not just locked, it felt different, like the electronic locking mechanism had seized up completely. He pounded on the door and called out, but there was no response from inside. Marcus had been trained for many scenarios, but total communications blackout combined with complete electrical failure had never been covered in any exercise. The palace had multiple backup power systems, redundant communication networks, and fail-safes that were supposed to make this kind of situation impossible. Yet here he was, alone in the dark, with no way to call for help and no way to know if his fellow guards were even alive. He was trying to decide on his next move when he heard new sounds from deeper in the palace. Not footsteps this time, but voices. Multiple voices, some shouting, some speaking in urgent whispers. At least some of the other guards were still functioning, which gave Marcus hope. He began moving toward the sounds, using them as a guide through the maze of corridors. As he got closer, he could make out individual words. Someone was calling for Director Walsh. Another voice was trying to establish radio contact with outside agencies. A third voice, which Marcus recognized as Lieutenant Rodriguez, was attempting to account for all personnel on duty. "Rodriguez," Marcus called out as he approached what he thought was the right location. "It's Chen. I'm coming toward your position." "Chen. Thank God. Where the hell have you been?" Rodriguez's voice was strained with stress. "East Wing when it happened." "Sir, I need to report possible intruders moving toward the royal quarters." The silence that followed Marcus's words was somehow more frightening than the darkness. When Rodriguez finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "What exactly did you hear, Chen?" Marcus described the footsteps, the voices, and most importantly, the electronic beeping and the sound of a security door opening. When he finished, he could hear urgent whispered conversations between Rodriguez and at least 2 other people. "Chen, I need you to listen very carefully," Rodriguez said finally. "What you're describing should be impossible. Every electronic system in this building is dead, including all the security doors. They can't be opened electronically, and the mechanical overrides require keys that are kept in a vault that's also electronically locked." "Sir, I know what I heard. I believe you. That's what scares me. We've managed to account for most of our personnel, but we're missing 3 guards from the restricted wing, and Director Walsh hasn't responded to any of our attempts to locate her." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. Director Walsh had been with those men in dark suits earlier in the evening. "Sir, before the power went out, there were 3 civilians who went to the restricted wing with the director. I saw them arrive around 8 p.m. Another long silence. Then Rodriguez's voice, even quieter than before. "Chen, there were no scheduled visitors tonight. No civilians have been cleared for access to the restricted wing." The implications of this revelation began to sink in. The men Marcus had seen weren't authorized visitors. They were infiltrators who had somehow gotten past the palace's legendary security. And now they were inside during a total systems failure that shouldn't have been possible. "Sir, what are your orders?" Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect that normal protocols were useless in this situation. "We're implementing Directive 7, Rodriguez replied, and Marcus felt his blood turn to ice water. Directive 7 was the most classified emergency protocol in the Royal Protection Handbook. It had been created after a failed assassination attempt in the 1970s, and was designed for scenarios where the normal chain of command had been compromised. Marcus had only read about it once during his advanced training, and he had hoped never to hear those words spoken in a real situation. Under Directive 7, all regular guards were to immediately evacuate the palace and establish a perimeter outside, while specialized units dealt with the threat inside. The theory was that in a worst-case scenario, it was better to contain the threat than to risk additional casualties among guards who weren't equipped for extraordinary circumstances. But Marcus couldn't shake the image of those confident footsteps moving through the darkness toward the royal quarters. Evacuating felt like abandonment, even though it was official protocol. "Sir, how long do we wait for the specialized units?" he asked. "They should have been here 30 minutes ago," Rodriguez admitted. "We can't raise them on any frequency, and the landlines are dead too. Chen, I think we're completely cut off." As if summoned by their conversation about outside help, a new sound reached them through the darkness. It was coming from outside the palace, a low rumbling that grew steadily louder. Marcus recognized it immediately. Helicopters, multiple aircraft approaching fast. Finally, someone whispered, "The cavalry's coming." But Rodriguez's next words shattered any hope of rescue. "Those aren't our helicopters. Our emergency response birds are based 15 minutes away, and they would have announced their approach on the emergency frequencies. These are coming from the wrong direction, and there's been no radio contact." The rumbling grew louder, and Marcus could tell the aircraft were landing on the palace grounds. In the distance, he could hear new voices, shouting commands in a language he couldn't identify. Whatever was happening tonight, it was much bigger than a simple break-in or even an assassination attempt. "Rodriguez," Marcus said quietly, "I don't think Directive 7 is going to be enough." The sound of helicopters landing turned the palace grounds into a war zone. Through the windows, Marcus could see bright lights sweeping across the courtyards, military-grade searchlights that cut through the darkness like laser beams. The contrast was jarring. Outside, whoever had arrived was operating with full power and advanced equipment. Inside the palace, the royal guards were stumbling around blind. "How is this possible?" whispered Guard Jennifer Kim, who had joined Marcus and Lieutenant Rodriguez in what they hoped was the communications room. "If there's some kind of electromagnetic pulse device that knocked out our systems, why aren't their electronics affected? Either they're using hardened military equipment that's immune to EMP or they're the ones who caused the blackout," Marcus finished. They knew it was coming and prepared for it. The implications were staggering. This wasn't a random attack or even a sophisticated terrorist operation. This was a coordinated assault by people with access to technology and intelligence that suggested government-level resources. But which government? And why target the royal family? Through the thick palace walls, they could hear vehicles moving across the grounds, doors slamming, and the organized chatter of what sounded like a military unit establishing positions. The foreign language Marcus had heard earlier was becoming clearer now. It sounded Eastern European, possibly Russian, but he couldn't be certain. "We need to get to the royal quarters," Kim said urgently. "If these people are here for the family, every minute we wait increases the danger." "With what equipment?" Rodriguez asked bitterly. "We're blind, deaf, and armed with weapons we can barely find in the dark. Moving toward an unknown number of professionally equipped attackers isn't tactical, it's suicide." But Marcus was thinking about those confident footsteps he had heard moving through the palace before the helicopters arrived. "Sir, I don't think we have a choice about waiting. The people I heard earlier, they're already inside. They had a head start, and they know exactly where they're going." As if summoned by his words, a new light appeared in the corridor outside their position. Not the sweeping beams of the external searchlights, but a steady, focused glow that was moving systematically through the palace interior. Someone was conducting a room-by-room search, and they were getting closer. The three guards pressed themselves against the wall and tried to stay silent. Through the crack under the door, they could see the light getting brighter. Voices accompanied the light, the same foreign language Marcus had heard from the helicopters, but spoken quietly and professionally. The light paused outside their door. Marcus could hear at least 3 people in the corridor, discussing something in urgent whispers. One voice was giving instructions while the others acknowledged orders. The light moved on after about 30 seconds, but the experience left all 3 guards shaking with adrenaline. "They're sweeping the entire palace," Rodriguez whispered, "looking for something or someone specific." "The royal family," Kim said. "Maybe. Or maybe us. Could be they want to eliminate all security personnel before proceeding with their primary objective. Marcus was only half listening to this conversation because something else had caught his attention. Through the window, he could see that the external lights weren't just random searchlights. They were arranged in a specific pattern around the palace, creating what looked like a complete perimeter. This wasn't just an assault. It was a siege. "We're surrounded," he told the others. "Whatever they're planning, they've cut off all escape routes." Rodriguez checked his watch, a mechanical timepiece that still worked despite the electronic blackout. It's been almost an hour since the power went out. If this were a normal emergency, there should have been response teams here within 15 minutes. The fact that no legitimate help has arrived suggests these people have also taken control of external communications. The sophistication of the operation was becoming clear. The attackers hadn't just disabled the palace's internal systems, they had isolated it completely from the outside world. The royal family, the guards, and anyone else in the building were effectively prisoners until the attackers accomplished whatever they had come to do. A new sound interrupted Marcus's thoughts. Footsteps in the corridor again, but this time they were running. Someone was moving fast through the palace, not with the measured confidence of the earlier intruders, but with the desperate urgency of someone fleeing. The footsteps stopped outside their door, and a voice called out in accented English, "Is anyone in there? I'm Agent Sarah Walsh. I need immediate assistance." The three guards exchanged glances in the darkness. Director Walsh had been missing since the blackout began, and hearing her voice was both a relief and a cause for suspicion. Why had she been unreachable for an hour? And how had she ended up in this part of the palace? Rodriguez made the decision to respond. "Director Walsh, this is Lieutenant Rodriguez with Guards Chen and Kim. Are you injured?" "What's your status?" "Rodriguez, thank God. I need you to open this door immediately. I have critical information about what's happening tonight, and we may only have minutes before they find us." "Ma'am, the electronic locks are down. We can't open the door from this side." "Stand back from the door. I have a manual override key." None of the guards had known that manual override keys existed for the internal doors, but they heard Walsh working at the lock. After several long moments, the door swung open, and Walsh stepped inside, closing and locking it behind her. Even in the darkness, Marcus could tell something was wrong with Director Walsh. Her breathing was labored, and she was moving like someone who had been injured. When she spoke, her voice was strained with pain and exhaustion. "Listen carefully, because I may not have time to repeat this," she began. "The three men who arrived earlier tonight weren't visitors. They were advanced scouts for a foreign intelligence operation. They used my security clearance and knowledge of palace protocols to disable our defensive systems from the inside." "Ma'am, how did they get your cooperation?" Rodriguez asked, though Marcus suspected he already knew the answer. "They didn't ask for my cooperation, Lieutenant. They had detailed information about my family, including the location of my daughter's school and my husband's office. The choice was compliance or watching my family die." The cold brutality of the situation was becoming clear. This wasn't just an attack on the royal family, it was an operation that had been planned for months, possibly years. The attackers had identified key personnel, researched their vulnerabilities, and created a plan that turned the palace's own security systems against itself. "What do they want?" Kim asked. "That's where it gets complicated," Walsh replied. "Based on what I overheard, this isn't an assassination attempt. They want something from the palace. Something specific that they believe is hidden in the restricted archives." Marcus felt a chill run through him. The restricted archives contained the most sensitive documents in the kingdom's history. Diplomatic secrets, intelligence files, and historical records that could destabilize governments if made public. "Do you know what they're looking for?" he asked. "Documents related to something called Operation Nightfall. I've never heard of it, but they seem to think it's connected to events that happened during World War II. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Ma'am, if they're after historical documents, why the full assault? Why not just hack into the digital archives?" "Because Operation Nightfall predates digital records. Whatever they're looking for exists only in physical form, probably in the deep archives that even I don't have access to." And Rodriguez, "There's something else. They mentioned that they're not the only team. This operation is happening simultaneously in at least 3 other countries. The scope of what they were dealing with was staggering. This wasn't just an attack on one royal family or one country. It was a coordinated international operation, targeting historical secrets that someone considered worth starting a war over. "Ma'am, what are your orders?" Rodriguez asked. "Officially, we follow Directive 7 and evacuate. Unofficially, I need to tell you that the specialized response teams aren't coming. The attackers have control of the communication networks and have been sending false, all clear messages to our emergency contacts. As far as the outside world knows, everything at the palace is normal." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. So we're the only thing standing between these people and whatever they're trying to steal. "Worse than that," Walsh said grimly. "I heard them discussing timeline. They need to be finished and gone before dawn, which gives them about 4 more hours. After that, they plan to eliminate all witnesses and destroy evidence of their presence here." The threat to the royal family had been Marcus's primary concern, but now he realized that everyone in the palace, guards, staff, anyone who had seen or heard anything tonight, was marked for death. The attackers weren't planning to escape quietly. They were planning to leave behind a crime scene that would look like a tragic accident or natural disaster. "Where is the royal family now?" Kim asked. "Safe room protocols were activated automatically when the power went out," Walsh replied. "They're in the bunker beneath the West Wing, but the attackers know about it. The safety systems will keep them secure for maybe 2 more hours. But after that, those doors can be breached with enough time and the right equipment." "What about the archives? Can we get there first and remove whatever they're looking for?" "The deep archives are 3 levels underground and behind security doors that require 2-person authorization. Even if we could get there, we don't know what we're looking for among thousands of documents." Marcus was thinking furiously, trying to find some advantage they could exploit. "Ma'am, you said they needed you to access our security systems. That means they don't have complete intelligence about the palace layout and procedures." "That's correct. Their knowledge is extensive but not perfect. Then maybe we know things they don't. Hidden passages, emergency protocols, structural weaknesses they haven't accounted for." Walsh was quiet for a moment, and Marcus could tell she was considering possibilities. "There are maintenance tunnels beneath the palace that connect to the city's old sewer system. They're not on any modern blueprints because they were sealed during renovations in the 1960s. "Sealed, but not filled?" Rodriguez asked. "Sealed, but accessible if you know where to look. The entrance is in the basement of the East Wing, behind what looks like a solid wall." For the first time since the blackout began, Marcus felt a spark of hope. If they could access the tunnel system, they might be able to move through the palace without being detected, reach the royal family, or even escape to get help. But Walsh's next words extinguished that hope quickly. "The problem is getting to the East Wing basement. The attackers have teams covering all the major corridors, and they're moving in a systematic search pattern. The chances of reaching that entrance without being detected are minimal." Outside their hiding place, the sounds of the search were getting closer again. The professional voices were coming from multiple directions now, suggesting that the attackers had split into several teams and were tightening their net around the palace interior. "We're running out of time," Walsh said urgently. "I estimate we have maybe 10 more minutes before they reach this section of the palace. We need to make a decision about our next move." Marcus looked at his companions in the darkness and realized that they were facing an impossible choice. Stay hidden and hope the attackers would miss them, knowing that discovery meant certain death. Try to reach the royal family and risk walking into a trap. Attempt to escape through the tunnels and abandon everyone else in the palace to their fate. "There's a 4th option," he said quietly. "We could try to turn the tables on them." "What do you mean?" Rodriguez asked. "They have the advantage of equipment and numbers, but we have the advantage of knowing this building better than they do. Instead of running from them, we could start hunting them." The silence that followed Marcus's suggestion was heavy with implications. What he was proposing wasn't just dangerous, it was a violation of every principle of defensive security. Guards were trained to protect and evacuate, not to conduct defensive operations against superior forces. But Director Walsh's voice, when she finally spoke, carried a note of grim approval. "Guard Chen, what exactly did you have in mind?" Marcus's plan was born from desperation and fueled by anger. The attackers had turned the palace into their hunting ground, methodically searching for their target while treating everyone inside as disposable obstacles. But Marcus knew something they didn't. Every shortcut, every hidden alcove, every maintenance access that 3 years of daily patrols had burned into his memory. They're operating like they own this place, he explained to the others in a whisper, moving openly through the main corridors, using lights, talking freely. They think they've eliminated all opposition, which means they're not expecting resistance from behind. Director Walsh understood immediately. You want to use guerrilla tactics. Hit them from unexpected angles and disappear before they can respond. Exactly. We can't match their firepower or equipment, but we can make them afraid. Fear makes people make mistakes, and mistakes create opportunities. Lieutenant Rodriguez was skeptical. Chen, these aren't amateur criminals. They're professional operatives who planned this operation for months. What makes you think we can rattle them? Because their plan depends on speed and efficiency, Marcus replied. They need to find what they're looking for and get out before dawn. Every minute we delay them, every team member they have to divert to hunt us down, puts pressure on their timeline. And pressure creates mistakes. The sound of approaching footsteps cut their planning short. The search team was almost at their location, sweeping systematically through each room. Walsh quickly checked the manual override key she had used to open their door. I can lock this from the outside, she whispered. If they check this room and find it empty, they might mark it as cleared and move on. It was a risky gamble, but staying put was certain capture. The 4 guards slipped out into the corridor, with Walsh locking the door behind them. The approaching lights were visible around the corner, maybe 30 seconds away. Marcus led them in the opposite direction, toward a service stairway he knew connected to the building's ventilation system. The stairs were narrow and steep, designed for maintenance workers rather than regular foot traffic, but they offered access to parts of the palace that weren't on any tourist maps or public blueprints. As they climbed, Marcus could hear the search team reaching the room they had just vacated. Voices discussed something briefly, then moved on. The first part of their escape had worked, but now came the hard part, figuring out how to strike back. The ventilation level was a maze of ducts, electrical conduits, and mechanical equipment that kept the palace running. Marcus had been up here several times during his training, learning the building's infrastructure in case of emergencies. He had never imagined the emergency would be an invasion by foreign operatives. Where does this level connect to the main palace? Walsh asked, studying the layout in the dim light from an emergency glow stick Kim had found in a maintenance kit. There are access points above most major rooms, Marcus explained. The attackers are using the main corridors, but if we can get ahead of them, we might be able to observe their movements and find weaknesses in their formation. They moved carefully through the mechanical spaces, following Marcus's lead as he navigated by touch and memory. The sounds of the search below them were muffled but audible: footsteps, radio chatter, and occasionally the squeak of doors being opened and closed. After about 10 minutes of crawling through tight spaces, Marcus found what he was looking for: a maintenance access that opened above the palace's main gallery. Through the small opening, he could see lights moving below and hear voices more clearly than they had since the blackout began. What he saw made his blood run cold. There weren't just 3 or 4 attackers, as he had initially thought. There were at least a dozen people moving through the palace with military precision, all wearing night vision equipment and carrying assault weapons. This wasn't a covert operation, it was an occupation. But more disturbing than their numbers was their organization. They were operating with detailed knowledge of the palace layout, posting guards at strategic choke points and moving in coordinated teams that suggested extensive reconnaissance. Someone had provided them with architectural plans and security protocols that should have been impossible to obtain. Rodriguez, Marcus whispered, I think we have a bigger problem than foreign operatives. What do you mean? Look at how they're moving. They know exactly where to go, which rooms to skip, which corridors provide the best tactical advantage. This level of knowledge suggests inside help at the highest levels. Director Walsh, who had been listening to their conversation, spoke in a voice heavy with realization. The 3 men who arrived tonight, they weren't just advanced scouts. They were conducting final coordination with someone who's been feeding them intelligence for weeks or months. The implications were staggering. The Royal Protection Service had been infiltrated. possibly at the highest levels. The attackers weren't just using Director Walsh's coerced cooperation. They had willing collaborators among the people, sworn to protect the royal family. If that's true, Kim said quietly, then everyone we might try to contact for help could be compromised. Marcus was watching the team below when he noticed something that gave him an idea. One of the attackers was carrying what looked like a communications device that was clearly working despite the electronic blackout affecting all palace systems. If they could get their hands on that equipment, they might be able to contact legitimate outside help. "I'm going to try something," he told the others. "There's an attacker positioned alone about 50 feet from here, near the entrance to the state dining room. If we can take him quietly, we might get access to their communications equipment." "Chen, that's insane," Rodriguez protested. "These people are armed and trained. We don't even know what kind of weapons they're carrying. We know they're not expecting resistance from inside the palace. Surprise is the only advantage we have, and if we don't use it soon, we'll lose it completely." Walsh considered the proposal for a moment. "What's your plan for getting down there without being seen?" Marcus pointed to a section of the ceiling where decorative molding concealed a maintenance access large enough for a person to fit through. "I can drop down behind him, but I'll need cover to get back up if something goes wrong. And if you get caught, then you continue without me and find another way to help the royal family." It was a simple plan with a low probability of success, but it was better than hiding in the ventilation system while the attackers completed their mission. Marcus positioned himself above the access point and waited for the right moment. The lone attacker was checking rooms methodically, spending about 2 minutes in each location before moving to the next. When he disappeared into the dining room, Marcus dropped silently through the ceiling access and landed behind him in the corridor. The attacker emerged from the dining room exactly as Marcus had anticipated, but instead of the quiet takedown Marcus had planned, the man spun around immediately, as if he had sensed movement behind him. Training took over for both men. Marcus lunged forward while the attacker reached for his weapon. The struggle was brief but intense. The attacker was skilled and strong, but Marcus had the advantage of desperation and intimate knowledge of the corridor layout. When they crashed into the wall, Marcus used his knowledge of which sections were solid stone and which concealed hollow spaces to slam his opponent into an unforgiving surface. The attacker went down hard, his communications device skittering across the marble floor. Marcus grabbed the equipment and scrambled back toward the ceiling access, but the sound of the fight had attracted attention. Flashlights were converging on his position from multiple directions. "Chen, get up here now," Rodriguez called from above. Marcus hauled himself up through the access point just as the first attacker reached his position. Behind him, he could hear urgent radio chatter in multiple languages. His assault had disrupted their careful coordination and put them on high alert. But he had accomplished his primary objective. The communications device in his hand was still functioning, and through its speaker he could hear conversations between different teams, spread throughout the palace and surrounding grounds. "What are they saying?" Walsh asked as they moved quickly through the ventilation system to put distance between themselves and the search teams that would now be looking specifically for them. Marcus listened to several exchanges before responding. "The team in the restricted wing has found the entrance to the deep archives. They're requesting additional time to break through the security measures, but someone is telling them they need to maintain the original timeline." "How much time do they need?" "From what I can understand, about 2 hours to break through the physical barriers, plus additional time to locate the specific documents they're looking for." Walsh checked her watch. "It's almost 1:30 a.m. If they need 2 hours starting now, that puts them dangerously close to their dawn deadline." The pressure on the attacker's timeline was exactly what Marcus had hoped to create. Their carefully planned operation was starting to fray around the edges, and desperate people made mistakes. "There's something else," Marcus said, continuing to monitor the communications. "They're having problems with the teams outside. Apparently some kind of legitimate law enforcement has shown up at the perimeter, and they're trying to maintain the illusion that everything is normal." This was the first good news they had heard all night. If real authorities were at the palace gates, there might still be hope for rescue, but the attackers were clearly prepared for this possibility and had contingency plans. "They're telling the outside teams to maintain positions until the archive team completes their mission," Marcus reported. "After that, they're planning to activate something they're calling Protocol 7. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Both the royal guards and the attackers had protocols numbered 7, but Marcus suspected the attackers' version was considerably more sinister than an evacuation order. "We need to find out what Protocol 7 means for them," Walsh said urgently. "If it's what I think it is, we're looking at a complete elimination of evidence, including all witnesses." As if summoned by her words, a new voice came through the communications device, speaking in heavily accented English that Marcus could understand clearly for the first time all night. "Archive team, this is command. You have 90 minutes maximum to complete your objective. After that, we implement final protocols regardless of completion status. All personnel should be prepared for immediate extraction followed by site sanitization." The euphemism sent chills through all 4 guards. The attackers weren't just planning to escape. They were planning to destroy the palace and everyone in it. "How much explosive would it take to bring down a building this size?" Kim asked quietly. "Depends on placement and type," Walsh replied grimly. "But if they've been planning this for months, they've had plenty of time to position charges in structural weak points. The entire building could come down in a matter of minutes." Marcus was listening to continued chatter on the communications device when he heard something that changed everything. One of the teams was reporting to command about the target in the safe room and requesting instructions for extraction procedures. "They found the royal family," he told the others. "And from what I'm hearing, they're not planning to kill them here. They want to take them alive." The implications were staggering. This wasn't just theft of historical documents or even assassination. It was kidnapping on an international scale. Whatever Operation Nightfall had been, it was important enough that someone was willing to abduct a royal family to obtain information about it. "If they're planning to take the family alive," Walsh said slowly, "then they need transportation and a secure location for interrogation. That's logistically much more complicated than a simple smash-and-grab operation." Marcus was already thinking ahead. "It also means they need time. Time to break into the safe room. Time to secure prisoners. Time to transport them to wherever they're going. Time we might be able to deny them." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that if we can't stop them from finding what they want, maybe we can make sure they run out of time to do anything with it." The plan forming in Marcus's mind was even more dangerous than his earlier ideas, but as he listened to the attackers coordinate their assault on the safe room, he realized that conventional tactics were useless. The only way to save the royal family was to force the attackers into a situation where their careful planning became a liability instead of an advantage. "Director Walsh," he said quietly, "how well do you know the palace's structural systems?" Director Walsh understood Marcus's question immediately. The palace's structural systems weren't just about keeping the lights on and the air flowing. They controlled everything from fire suppression to emergency lockdowns that could seal sections of the building independently. If the attackers had disabled the electronic controls but not the mechanical backups, there might be ways to turn the palace itself into a weapon against the invasion. "The mechanical overrides are located in the sub-basement," Walsh explained as they moved carefully through the ventilation system. "They were installed during the renovations in the 1980s as fail-safes in case of electronic warfare or electromagnetic pulse attacks. Ironic, considering that's exactly what we're dealing with." "What kind of controls are we talking about?" Rodriguez asked. "Fire suppression systems that can flood entire sections with inert gas, emergency bulkheads that can seal off corridors, even a building-wide lockdown that was designed to contain threats until outside help could arrive." Marcus was listening to the stolen communications device as Walsh explained their options. The attackers were making steady progress on multiple fronts. The team at the archives had broken through the first layer of security and was working on accessing the document storage areas. The team at the safe room was setting up equipment to breach the reinforced doors. Most ominously, teams throughout the palace were reporting that they had completed their primary sweep and were beginning to install what they called preparation charges. "How long to reach the sub-basement?" Marcus asked. "From here? About 15 minutes if we use the service elevators. But the elevator shafts might be monitored, and we'd be trapped if we encountered an attacker team." "What about the maintenance stairs?" 45 minutes, maybe an hour. And that's assuming we don't run into any of their people along the way." Marcus did the math quickly. The attackers had given themselves 90 minutes to complete their mission before implementing their final protocol. It had been about 20 minutes since that deadline was announced, which left roughly 70 minutes. If it took them an hour to reach the mechanical controls, they would have 10 minutes to figure out how to use systems they had never operated before. "There has to be a faster way," he said. Kim had been studying the maintenance diagrams Walsh had found. "What about the old dumbwaiter system? The building plans show it connects directly from the kitchen level to the sub-basement." "Those haven't been used in decades," Walsh protested. "They're probably sealed or blocked." "But they're not monitored," Marcus pointed out. "The attackers wouldn't know to watch them because they're not on any modern security plans." It was another desperate gamble, but their entire night had been a series of desperate gambles. Marcus led them through the ventilation system toward the kitchen complex, following his memory of the building's layout and the faint sounds of activity from the floors below. The kitchen level was eerily quiet when they finally reached it. The attackers had swept through this area earlier, but hadn't left anyone behind to guard it. Marcus found the dumbwaiter access hidden behind what looked like a decorative panel in the old servants' corridor. The opening was small and would be a tight fit for an adult, but it appeared clear all the way down to the basement level. "I'll go first," Marcus volunteered. "If there are problems, the rest of you can find another route." "Chen, if you get stuck in that shaft, we can't help you," Rodriguez warned. "If we don't try this, nobody gets help." Marcus squeezed into the dumbwaiter shaft and began the careful climb down. The old pulley system still worked, though it creaked ominously under his weight. As he descended, he could hear activity on the floors he passed, the systematic sounds of the attackers continuing their mission while unaware that anyone was moving beneath their feet. The shaft ended at what had been the basement storage area decades ago. Marcus emerged into a dusty room filled with abandoned furniture and old equipment. More importantly, he could see a corridor that led toward the mechanical systems area Walsh had described. He helped the others down from the shaft, and they began moving through the basement level. The sounds of the attackers were muted here, but they could still hear the rumble of heavy equipment being moved around above them. Whatever the preparation charges were, they required significant setup time. The mechanical controls were located behind a heavy steel door marked with warnings about authorized personnel and electrical hazards. Walsh produced another manual override key and led them into a room that looked like the control center of a power plant. Banks of gauges, switches, and monitoring equipment lined the walls. Most of the electronic displays were dark due to the power outage, but the mechanical systems were still functional. Walsh moved quickly to a section labeled Emergency Protocols and began examining the available options. "Fire suppression for individual floors," she read from the labels. "Emergency ventilation cutoffs, water pressure controls, and here, emergency containment protocols." Marcus was monitoring the communications device while Walsh worked. The chatter had become more urgent in the past few minutes. The archive team was reporting success in accessing the document storage, but was having trouble locating the specific files they needed. The safe room team was requesting more time to complete their breach. Most concerning, Command was becoming impatient with the delays. "Archive team, you have 30 minutes to locate target documents," the command voice announced. "Safe room team, expedite extraction procedures." All other units finalize preparation and stand by for Protocol 7 implementation. "Walsh, we're running out of time," Marcus said urgently. "What can these systems do to help us?" The emergency containment protocol was designed for terrorist situations, she explained while studying the control panel. It can seal off sections of the building independently and flood them with inert gas to neutralize threats. "But Chen, if we use it wrong, we could trap the royal family instead of helping them." "What about the preparation charges? Can we interfere with whatever they're setting up?" "Possibly. If they're using the building's existing infrastructure to place explosives, cutting power and water to those systems might disrupt their plans." Rodriguez was watching the access door while Kim helped Walsh examine the controls. "Director, whatever we're going to do, we need to do it fast. I can hear movement in the corridor outside." Marcus made a decision that went against every instinct of his training. Instead of trying to be surgical and precise, he was going to create chaos and hope it worked in their favor. "Walsh, can you activate every emergency system simultaneously?" "What?" Chen, that would be completely contrary to safety protocols. The systems are designed to work independently to avoid conflicts. But would it work? Could you flood the upper floors with inert gas, seal the emergency exits, and cut power to their equipment all at the same time? Walsh stared at him in the dim light of their emergency illumination. Theoretically, yes, but the interaction between systems could create unpredictable results. Parts of the building could become uninhabitable, even for us. The building's already uninhabitable with armed invaders running through it, Marcus pointed out. At least this way we control the chaos instead of them. The logic was sound, even if the plan was insane. Walsh began working at the control panel, manually overriding safety interlocks and activating systems in combinations that had never been tested. Warning lights that still function began flashing as the building's mechanical systems responded to commands they had never been designed to receive simultaneously. The effect was almost immediate. Through the communications device, Marcus could hear confusion and alarm spreading through the attacker teams. The inert gas flooding the upper floors was forcing them to evacuate areas they had already secured. The sealed emergency exits were trapping some teams in sections of the building they couldn't easily leave. Most importantly, the power cuts were shutting down equipment they needed for their primary mission. Archive team reports equipment malfunction due to atmospheric contamination. Marcus translated from the radio chatter. They're requesting immediate technical support. Safe room team is reporting similar problems, Kim added, listening to another frequency. Something about their cutting equipment being affected by the gas mixtures. But Walsh's face was grim as she monitored the mechanical systems she had activated. Chen, we've bought time, but probably not much. These systems aren't designed to run simultaneously. They're already starting to conflict with each other, and some of the safety overrides are beginning to kick in. As if summoned by her warning, new voices appeared on the communications device. Command was giving orders that Marcus could understand clearly, and they confirmed his worst fears. All teams abort primary mission and implement Protocol 7 immediately. Repeat, abort primary mission. We are moving to final phase. The attackers were abandoning their careful plan and moving to their fallback option, complete destruction of the palace and everyone in it. Marcus realized that his desperate gambit had backfired. Instead of stopping the attackers, he had forced them to accelerate their timeline for the worst possible outcome. How long before the building systems fail completely? He asked Walsh. Maybe 20 minutes before the conflicts cause complete shutdown. After that, we'll have no environmental controls at all. And how long before they can implement their Protocol 7? Walsh was working at another section of the control panel, trying to find options they hadn't considered yet. If they're using pre-positioned charges, maybe 10 minutes to arm and evacuate. If they need to improvise because of our interference, maybe 30 minutes. The math was close but not good enough. They had created problems for the attackers but not insurmountable ones. The royal family was still trapped in the safe room. The attackers still controlled the palace, and now everyone inside had less than half an hour before the building came down around them. Marcus was studying the control panel when he noticed something Walsh had missed. Among the emergency protocols was a section labeled Historical Defense Systems, with controls that looked much older than the 1980s renovations. Walsh, what are these historical systems? She followed his pointing finger, and her face went pale. Those are from the original palace construction in the 1750s. During the war years, the building was designed to function as a fortress if necessary. But Chen, those systems haven't been activated in over 2 centuries. We have no idea if they even still work. What were they designed to do? Complete lockdown. The building was constructed with internal barriers that could seal it off from outside attack, independent air and water supplies. And, she paused, reading labels she had apparently never noticed before. What looks like some kind of flooding system connected to the underground river. Marcus felt a spark of hope. If the palace could be turned into a fortress that had protected previous royal families during wartime, maybe it could protect this one too. But activating systems that old carried enormous risks. If we flood the underground areas, what happens to the people in the safe room? The safe room is designed to be watertight for exactly this kind of scenario. It should remain secure even if the lower levels flood. But anyone else in the basement areas? She didn't need to finish the sentence. Including them. If Marcus activated the historical defense systems, he would likely be condemning himself and his fellow guards to death to save the royal family. It was the kind of decision that military personnel trained for, but hoped never to face. The communications device crackled with new urgency. Command was giving final evacuation orders to their teams, and Marcus could hear the sounds of rapid movement throughout the palace. The attackers were pulling back to safe positions before destroying the building. "Rodriguez, Kim, Walsh," Marcus said quietly. "I need you to get to the safe room level and make sure the royal family is secure when the water comes." "What are you talking about?" Rodriguez demanded. "I'm going to activate the flood system. It should wash out the lower levels where most of their explosive charges are located, and it might disrupt their escape routes enough to give outside help time to arrive." "Chen, you'll be killed. Maybe. But if I don't do this, everyone in the palace dies for certain." Kim stepped forward. "I'm staying with you. These controls need 2 people to operate, and you don't know the systems well enough to do it alone." "Kim, that's not necessary." "Yes, it is. We swore to protect the royal family with our lives. This is what that oath means." Walsh handed Rodriguez her remaining override keys. "Get to the safe room. Make sure they're prepared for flooding in the lower levels. And Lieutenant, if we don't make it out of this, tell them what happened here tonight. Tell them these people died as heroes." Rodriguez hesitated for a moment, then saluted sharply before leading Walsh toward the exit. Marcus and Kim turned to the historical controls, trying to decipher instructions that had been written in an older form of English and referred to mechanical systems they barely understood. Above them, the palace was emptying as attackers evacuated to safe positions. In a few minutes, charges would detonate throughout the building, bringing down centuries of history and everyone trapped inside. Unless 2 guards who had never operated 18th century flood controls could figure out how to turn a royal palace into a medieval fortress. Marcus put his hand on the primary activation lever and looked at Kim. "Are you sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Together, they pulled the lever that would activate the palace's most ancient and desperate defense. Deep beneath them, mechanisms that had slept for 200 years groaned to life, and the sound of rushing water began to fill the underground chambers. The final battle for the palace had begun.